everyone. Time to begin our session. It was nice chatting with a few of you before we got started. This is the fifth session in this first kind of course on what I've learned about reincarnation and why it's so important to me. And I just got interrupted, but I'll focus back here. Okay, great. So there's been, again, a lot of great questions coming in, and some are almost book material. If I'd answered all those questions, we'd have a whole book, so that's interesting. And other questions are really very advanced. I'm going to have to put on an advanced course here for a good bunch of you, it looks like. I'm glad that so many of you have gotten kind of the basic gist of what I'm trying to get across here now. It involves a lot of things that may stretch people, like the whole natural concept of oneness, and how does that fit into reincarnation? We've discussed that, and I'll keep going back to that sort of thing because I need to keep reminding people of this. Everybody's looking for oneness somewhere else, but it may be you may be it. So let me see here. Here we go. Okay, so we've covered a lot of interesting subjects, and we will edit these that we recorded and make them into MP3s or whatever, so we can get more out of it that way. I know I get more out of things the more I listen to them, or if it's a really good book, if I read it more than once. I'm sure there'll be a lot more layers in these things that we've discussed. And again, your questions have been just excellent. I think I'll get started here with some of these questions that are very interesting and relate to what we've been going through. This is a question I get fairly often, and it's talking about the other belief systems like Buddhists, Hindus, and those sort of things, and the teachings that come from that school of thought. One thing that the light has had me, it must be because I love history. The light has given me a lot of history to look up over the years, and I have, including just recently, a whole thing about England in 536 that was very interesting. But so what's interesting about these modern religions, and the modern religions are really the from Buddhism on. Christianity, Islam, and all those religions since Buddhism. Before that, you go back into what's called an althea state of kind of consciousness. This is before anything's formalized. Buddha was Buddha before he knew he was Buddha, and Buddha was Buddha before there was a religion. And that's the pre-state. We're in the after state, or the afterlife of all of these concepts now, as they keep evolving. What the light has pointed out, though, is something that's central to most of these that didn't exist before, and that is, and it's Buddhist, it's Hindu, it's Christian, it's Islam. Excuse me. It's this whole concept that was not part of the original. It came apart because of time, pressures, populations, and a lot of things that the cultures were going through at the time. And can be, I think it's natural to, I love to understand and look at the natural progress or evolution of things, like watching a flower bloom. I have written about this particular idea, and that is the purposes of these, if you really kind of look at them, Buddhist, Hindu, Christian, Muslim, and all that, is that you really are looking to become enlightened and to not have to reincarnate back on Earth again. Even the Christians, you go to heaven. If you come back for that 1,000 years of bliss that's talked about, then that's over. And so it's.
No, come.
I entitle this genre of thought, I call it the promise of heaven. Do many of you know how new the concept of heaven is in human history? How new the concept of hell is? That's not even in the Old Testament. You've got a lot of people that have been cut and pasting the Bible ever since the 1850s, but that doesn't mean they're reading it as it was written. So this concept of heaven and hell came about in some very interesting times, and were part of the manifestation of those times. I'm not putting anybody down. I'm just saying the light has given me this overview. And the promise of heaven, when these promises of heavens and nirvanas and all this started coming about, there were some pretty tough times in the world, things I don't even think us Americans can even imagine at this point that people were having to go through at those times. And in those times, not even the masters of the times could see any kind of heaven on earth. Not hardly talked about, if at all. And everything was always about going to the other side, going to the other side. Your answer's there, your peace is there, your heaven is there. And religions have been very important as social vehicles, but also as the glue in empires. Constantine being one of the greatest ever. Constantine, his wife, and his mother were incredible geniuses. If you really understand what they did and what they pulled off, it was pretty amazing to be able to understand what they were doing when they were doing it, and they did. And Constantine was one of the first to understand that to control empires, where you have the Germans, the French, and everybody in your empire, they all had different gods. The idea of state religions. The Egyptians knew that. That's why the Egyptians didn't want any other. They controlled that for so long. And in the early days, the thing was it was many gods was the norm. Everybody had many gods. And then as empires got more and more organized, people started to bring in these concepts of one God, the God, my God. And that that's what you'd have to have in an empire, is one God, not many, many gods, because how do you get the French and the Germans to fight together against somebody else and that sort of thing? It's been pretty much that way ever since for empires of religion, which Islam and Christianity are. And also, in these deep, dark times in the East and Asia and in the West, in these deep, dark times when there wasn't science and there wasn't a sense of history as we know it today, and a history of surviving some of these great things that happened back then, so there was no real concept of heaven on earth. Earth was a place of trial and toil, and many of us have this long, hard road still very fresh in our cellular memory. And these concepts were very, very appealing for a number of reasons to the ruling class and also to the masses. And I'm not putting them down. I'm saying the promise of heaven got us through a lot of dark times. But that promise of heaven now is falling apart because science and freedom of taboos, freedom of empires, and So this whole concept of nirvana, you can leave here if you do things right and you just do your work and all of that, then you will get this promise that no one's actually really challenged until fairly recently in modern history. The culmination of this getting out of control was when the Catholics were selling stairways to heaven, buy your way to heaven kind of things. And this has happened in a good many religions. But the natural concept of reincarnation, the natural concept of life, is the return to life, not to leave life forever and leave life to go to some other plane that you may or may not have mastered. I mean, there's very shaky criteria on what it takes to get you into heaven. I think the Christians have one of the best ones, and that is a little water on your head and you're in. And then whatever you've done in your entire life, if you ask for forgiveness right before you die, you're okay. That was one of the reasons why Christianity was very popular among the ancient cultures of the empires. So it's a very interesting question, and if you're a history buff, it's something very interesting to look into, this promise of heaven. And also, the promise of hell was another way to control people. Ancient cultures really didn't look at things this way, and reincarnation wasn't really understood in some cultures until recently in history. But by that I mean, the last several thousand years. But then, even as those concepts came through, we didn't have science, and we had superstitions, we had lots of taboos, so those concepts were formed by that. And so some of these concepts are a form of escapism, and that's fine. I mean, I'm not putting down escapism, I'm not judging that at all. But from the Gaia point of view, to say that you're cutting off from the rest of us and not going to reincarnate and go through the natural process with the rest of us is very unnatural. I've said this before, it's a simple metaphor. It's very similar to you waking up one morning and one of your feet says, hello, I'm going to Cleveland, I'll see you later. In the realms of multiple probabilities, who knows, that could happen, but it isn't the norm. We tend to be a body of energy, a body of consciousness, and we are more one than we can ever imagine. And I've tried to get into those concepts of oneness. I mean, we're already so one with each other in the earth. It's incredible. We're so one that even 90% of our very body you're in right now belongs to the rest of the planet. 90%. Microbes and minerals and stardust in our bones. We belong to the universe. We come from it. We are it in this human Gaia form. So this promise of heaven, kind of sum this up, the promise of heaven in its best aspect in these different cosmoconceptions was a way to relieve pressure, give you some hope, and was brilliant in that way. But then, as everything else, these things sort of become distorted with power and greed and corruption, which has happened at every level of every religious order there's ever been. It's only natural, by the way, that this should happen occasionally. But so what we have is, in the modern days, when science has answered so many questions, I mean, if we still believe what the Bible would say, we would still have to say, God said in the Bible, the earth is it's the center of the universe, and that's it. That's what it says. Science has proven that not to be the case whatsoever, and in that way opens up to the rest of the universe. And so science is very important and can be of a spiritual nature, just as biology is a spiritual thing for me also. But it is a real thing. It's not an imagined cosmoconception that's unnatural. And in this modern world we're going into, things are going to become more and more natural, easier to understand. And in fact, we've gained more knowledge since the 1990s than all of human history put together. So, boy, that's a lot to digest, considering that this hit us in this incarnation. Most of us have only had one incarnation even dealing with this kind of information. So think of what's coming. It's going to be pretty incredible. This is just the beginning of a great expansion of consciousness and flowering of all of our cultures on planet Earth. The other thing, too, is that cosmic conceptions are fine as far as they go. Ceremonies are fine as far as they go. But when you get lost in the ceremony, when you don't know what the dance is about anymore, when you don't understand what the ceremony is about, well, then it becomes meaningless. And so the promises of these heavens are so easy nowadays to pick apart, and that's why I choose not to pick on the true believers. The true believers are people that don't need any proof at all. That's fine. I'm not here to pick on them at all. I know atheists pick on them, and intellectuals, rip them apart. But there are a lot of people on planet Earth that don't need any proof of anything, and they just believe what they believe, and that's fine. But if you were to challenge the concept of heaven, it falls apart pretty quickly. I mean, whose heaven? White people's heaven? Could God ever be black? Could God ever be a woman? It all starts falling apart so quickly nowadays. But back then, it seemed to make a lot of sense. And hold on a second here. Okay. So I'll go on, and so that was a great question. I just got kind of distracted here by this technology. Anyway, so let's move on. I hope you grasp that, and we can talk about those kind of concepts much deeper at another point here, and probably should, because it's a very interesting concept to understand. So much of our knowledge, what we think is our knowledge today, is actually very recent stuff that we really haven't even checked out. And so, like people are surprised to find out that the concepts of heaven and hell are actually relatively new concepts, and there may be reasons for those concepts. Interesting, isn't it? It's not like it's always been this way, and will always be this way. In fact, those things are changing very, very quickly. I'll go on to the next question now, and these are going to be some very interesting ones. And this is something that I think I don't want to split a million hairs over, but it's a very interesting question. That is, people want to know, what is consciousness? I mean, philosophers, geniuses, scientists, everybody's been, what is consciousness? How did it arise or come into existence? And I can tell you this, that there never will be a precise answer to these type of questions, depending on, what culture you come from, what level of understanding you're at, and probably even whatever planet you're from. If you're from other planets, it's going to change dramatically. What is consciousness? The interesting thing about consciousness is that it is obviously a natural outcome of the universe creating itself. It seems to be a natural outcome. What is consciousness? Well, what level are you talking on? Are you talking about just human consciousness? And then, gosh, there's so many different types of humans on planet Earth that have a different type of consciousness than we Americans do. So generally speaking, you've really got to boil that down to what is consciousness? Consciousness is an awareness, and that awareness can be from the atomic level. There are stones that interact with each other. There are plants we know now interact with each other at levels we never even imagined before. And so are we talking about just the specialized human consciousness, and that consciousness being a very present consciousness in the Industrial Revolution? The idea of love, the consciousness of love, romantic love, as we know, is a very new concept. Check out history. The idea of romantic love and marrying whoever you want to because you love them is a very new concept in consciousness here on this planet. And so that's the kind of question that, gosh, you could. It's a philosopher's question. You can say whatever it is, and it'd probably be right. What is consciousness? How did it arise? It arose out of the natural outcome of the universe self-organizing itself beyond intelligence. And the follow-up question of that is, how does the state of consciousness differ from alive people and dead ones? If it does differ, again, there's an incredible life form on this planet that we're a part of, and this has a matrix that humans perceive as the light at the end of the tunnel. Although, if you really study near-death research, most near-deathers don't have a tunnel in their experience. It's not the norm, actually. But that's what television and modern writers have said about it. But if you really study the field, most near-deathers don't see a tunnel. I didn't actually see a tunnel. For me, it was more like being at the bottom of the ocean, trying to get to the top of it in that way. So the consciousness, the only difference in consciousness between what we call alive people who are in their body, animated in their bodies, and people that are on the other side is that the information on the other side is recorded in the Book of Life, the hologram of life, the Akashic Records, which is made of every living thought, every prayer, every action you've ever had is quanta. It's real conscious material, physical material stuff at a very subtle energy level that seeks its own vibrational level, like birds of a feather flock together, and water seeks its own level. That means that if you could see what I saw on the other side, it's like every thought that's ever been had, from the worst thought you can imagine to the best thought, have all self-organized themselves in the Akashic Records by vibration. And so the Akashic Records, or the Book of Life, or whatever you want to call it, I've quite often told people is the good, the bad, and the magnificent. It's all there. It's all the worst thoughts you could imagine and worst ideas you could imagine. And it's also got some of the best stuff ever. But all of this keeps evolving and keeps mixing and merging. And on its own level, the hologram tends to evolve. And that's why it can be very useful, to communicate with with people on the other side, whatever you want to call the recording on the other side, because there's some interesting evolutions that go on over there. And say if you're a doctor or if you're an explorer like myself, you can tend to find groups that have sort of organized around certain issues. And that's just self-organization. It's beyond intellect, actually. It's just self-organization, the way the whole universe does it, the way gold, when a star supernova blows itself up, it makes all the heavy elements, including gold. Well, all those heavy elements are like, how do they find themselves to come back into like a rock of gold? It's self-selection. I mean, we tend to attract ourselves back together. A funny notion is this ionic attraction of how everything comes together is very interesting. Did you know that the dust bunnies some of you may have under your beds are exactly the same way that planets form? So watch out. You may have a big planet forming under your bed if you don't take care of those dust balls. But it's true. Consciousness, very loose term. I tend to look at the natural consciousness of our living system and its evolution just is what we would call a genius. The idea that not only do most of the elements in the universe cooperate with each other very well, but same thing with human beings on this planet. Human beings cooperate with each other more than we don't cooperate with each other. I mean, just think about the bus driver and the people getting on the buses and airports and people taking care of all that, and how well we work together, and that most people don't cause a lot of trouble, going through the airport, whether deserved or not. We tend to cooperate very, very well with each other, and that's a form of consciousness that's very beneficial to evolution. So just think a little bit differently about consciousness, not just so strictly human-oriented. That way you can expand your consciousness. As long as you're just thinking like a human and everything must fit the way you think, and we can't possibly process everything that's going on around us at this time, then you're probably going to miss a lot of stuff going on. That's why shamans are very interested. They can become part of an animal consciousness. They can become part of a leaf on a tree consciousness, and they get so much valuable information that way when we can not just look at everything from a human point of view. So we'll go on to the next set of questions here now, and this is very interesting. I get this fair often. Are there different Gaias for other planets with life out there? And the answer is, of course, yes, there are. Whether any of those have come here or not is still questionable. Not to some, but to most of us, it's still questionable. We're looking for some kind of outcome from any of that kind of thing besides philosophy. It'd be. I'm getting ready to do a series in my newsletters, a series of thought experiments. And one of the thought experiments would be that I'm going to ask people to send in answers for would be to simply, if you were an alien race that could transcend time and space, and once you're able to do that, of course, you've transcended survival. You don't need gold. You don't need to come to Earth to have humans mine gold mines for you. I mean, that's just really very silly stuff. But if you did come to Earth and you had all the answers for Earthlings, and it's okay to have the answers. I mean, look at how the positive side of cultures mixing, they've actually upgraded themselves. So I'm not a believer in that humans have to learn everything on their own. I believe that we can certainly accept alien species and learn from them and upgrade ourselves dramatically. So I have no compulsions of believing that they're not going to help us because we're not ready. But on the other hand, if you were really going to help culture and you could cure their diseases, you could end their strife, you could end any kind of food, water problem for them fairly easily, would you have a couple of requirements? Or, certainly you wouldn't just give it out freely. There has to be an interesting process that goes on there. So this is kind of how I look at those sort of things. But there are many Gaias, and the Gaias are really these planetary systems that have come alive and become consciousness and keep evolving, and there's tons of them out there. And so there are many, many Gaias, and the Gaias may be on different levels. Maybe there weren't mammals on a certain planet or whatever, but the levels are pretty astounding, and they are all fully conscious. And that we can become conscious of each other is pretty amazing, and I think clearly demonstrated by the work of Cleve Baxter in primary perception. It's just that I just don't believe that any culture should hold back helping another culture. I mean, if they need it. So anyway, that's my spin on it. But there are many, many Gaias, many planets out there, and sooner or later, it's all bound to come out to be something we really don't expect. I believe it's going to be very different than we expect. It would have to be. It would have to be more intelligent than us, I would say. So many Gaias, many worlds out there, and there are many Gaias in preparation to receive star seeds from other planets. And we ourselves may be a star seed. There's some evidence of that. But so many Gaias and many Gaias waiting to be seeded with higher forms of consciousness and intelligence. Very beautiful, actually. And it's the way the universe keeps going, because worlds will wear out, worlds will die. But does consciousness have to die? No, not at all. So go on to the next question here. Let's see. Okay. One question here that kind of goes back to a couple of the earlier sessions, and that is, and I think the person who wrote this question may have missed that, but I want to go back over it again. It's basically asking the question I covered on how do we plan for our lives, our next lives ahead, and that'll be available on the MP3. That'll be available. But basically, I want to tell you that it's about focus. Focus is also about becoming a more intelligent being. It's about becoming a more conscious being. When you're not focused, you're not being conscious. And this life requires a lot of focus on a lot of levels just to get through the day. This focus is very, very important to have about preparing for your next life. And that's why I said in the earlier part of the course that it's very important not to complicate it, not to split hairs to infinity when you try to plan this out. It's more important to get the gist of it. Maybe what country, what type of people you'd like to come back and be with, what type, it's the type, not the specific individual, although many of you may want to do that. It's very possible to come back with the people you've known before. A bit tricky, though, because unless you're a twin flame or one of those co-joined beings, there's probably going to be a lot of hit and misses till you get it together over many lives or a number of lives. And so it's very important when planning, and it's a great exercise when planning your next life, is to plan a life that's generally where you want to be, generally who you want to be with. And when it comes to marriage, partners, children, jobs, and all that stuff, please just fill in the details once you get into that life. I think my life's going to be very different next time because I really have much more of an idea in this life of who I am and what I'm really interested in and fascinated with. So I'm going to keep that focus and try to practice through hypnosis how to die consciously and how to keep my consciousness. That's a good way to prepare and practice. It's like practice run. These can be all very, very important to you, but if you try to get down all the exact details, number one, you're not going to be able to remember it as you make the transition. So that's another thing. If you can't remember it by heart, then you're probably not going to have the focus on it. That's why it should be fairly simple, depending on the type of mind that you have. But so the gist of it is more important because it'll get you in the right area, get you in the neighborhood, it'll get you with the right people, it'll get you in the right frequency, the right birds of a feather, so to speak. And you have to have this focus when you die, and that could happen accidentally in a car accident, it could happen accidentally from a disease, or it could happen through old age and dying in your sleep. And so part of what I practice when I do my hypnosis on dying consciously is to say that suddenly I find myself out of body. Because, there are many people that have wrecks and stuff, don't even see it coming or didn't see it coming, and suddenly you're dead. How about a soldier on a battlefield that crossing the field and an artillery shell comes in and suddenly he's vaporized? There is no body. So that's the trigger, and I will be putting out my own hypnosis course on this in the near future, really, because it's something I've worked on for a while. But basically, one of the triggers is the minute you find yourself out of body because you've read about this and you've tried to put it into your mind, the minute you find yourself out of body, you go, okay, I know what to do now. I know what's just happened. And that way you won't be left as a disincarnate soul walking around till it all gets figured out or time passes and the energy is dissipated. So in that respect, it's very good to practice these things and to remember that you can actually write a script, learn to memorize it, or most of it, and the minute you find yourself out of body for no reason whatsoever or expected, then you go, okay, I know what to do. It's already in your subconscious. The book is in your subconscious already. The plan is in your subconscious, which goes with you. So it's very important to practice that part of it. Okay. I've got a very interesting question here because it's something I talk about that's very important with karma, and it also it does affect reincarnation, and that is, this is from my friend Kelly, and that is, there seems to be a field of beliefs. For example, our U.S. belief around guns, vastly different than Western Europe, at least, and why are we drawn to this? Why is there this field of beliefs? And so I can tell you this, I've asked the light about this on a number of occasions from a number of different perspectives, and with just this one item alone, which is typical of a whole lot of items, once I start explaining it, you'll kind of put the pieces together. What we have in Western Europe that's different from the U.S. is the U.S. is what? Not even 250 years old. Europe, on the other hand, is thousands of years old. There was this cheese shop in Italy that's itself over 1,000 years old. I mean, that cheese shop's been around for 1,000 years. I don't think we have anything that comes close to that. Do you think there'll be a submarine shop in the same location 1,000 years from now in America, in Philly or anything like that? So what you have here is a different experience. Western Europe, and we could talk about the East, we could talk about other places, Africa and all over, but we'll just stick with this one for now. Western Europe has been through so much. It's been through empires, things you can't even imagine, things that Americans will never experience. I mean, America's yet to really be fully attacked by a foreign country of any power at all. I mean, the poor Iraqis and poor people in Afghanistan having their homes bombed all the time is something we have not had to experience in this country yet, except for a touch of it in the Civil War. And we've already forgotten that lesson. But once you've had thousands of years of wars and things coming through and violence and all this is sort of worked out, then you would have a very different attitude about giving everybody guns and weapons, especially without background checks. It just amazes most of the world how we treat this. But it's because the U.S. is a baby country and we don't have these experiences. Had we had the wars and the devastation, and so many of us would have had our families devastated, our incarnations changed so often that we might have a different perspective in America. I mean, I was trying to tell somebody the other day that what if somebody like France or some other country got drones and started blowing up houses around here because they didn't like what you were saying about them on TV, as we've done here in America, as President Obama's done. What about freedom of speech? You can label anybody a terrorist or anybody this, that, or the other, and that does that give you permission to do whatever you want with them? So we have a different perspective here that horrifies and is mystifying to cultures that have been through thousands of years of these things. And so there's a very big difference. That's where the attitude comes in. It isn't like our souls are bad or anything like that. It's just that this country, since the Civil War, has been a very heavily armed country. Started at the end of the Civil War when nobody had to turn their guns back in. And things have just gone on from there. But so these are lessons learned. The lessons learned also by the East and Western Europe and all that we didn't have to put up much with is things like monarchies were broken up by now in Western Europe and around the world. Caste systems. You can say we have sort of a caste system now, but that's what it's may evolve into if we let the oligarchy just totally control everything that is in this country. It may end up that way. We have another caste system, but it didn't start that way per se. And then racial prejudices, England and other countries were some of the first to really break away from this. America was one of the last to break away from these very negative racial prejudices. So that's the big difference between the U.S. and say, Western Europe, is this historical learning, lessons learned, so to speak. If Americans were bombed as much as Germany and France and other countries have been bombed, we might not want to ever have a war again. And I think they've reached that point. Can anyone here imagine France and Germany having another war at this point? I don't see it. These are lessons learned, and America's stumbling into this stuff because we're the big guy on the block. But it doesn't mean we've learned anything from it. So very interesting how these things evolve, and it has a lot to do with experience, the kind of experiences you've had. So the next question. This is an interesting one, and I may have covered part of it. I'll do it again. Is the notion when I think it's been misunderstood a couple of times. When I was asking the light what was the best religion and this, that, and the other, the light or the universe said, "I don't care." But it was a loving "I don't care." It was like, that's not what it's about, Mellen. It's not about that for this universe. I'll give you this example, and this is what the beauty of it is also. Maybe call the universe an ocean, okay? Now, and this is a metaphor, does the ocean care about you? The ocean is alive, but the ocean is not religious. The ocean is not politics. We see the ocean. We see it as beautiful. We see it as powerful. We see it threatening. We also see it as awe-inspiring and regenerative. Does the ocean say that to us? No, we say that to the ocean. That's how we perceive the ocean. And this is what the light was trying to get across, was that caring, as we talk about it in human form, is something that we have created and that we share. And it is so important. It doesn't have it, because it may or may not have been created by a deity. Shouldn't take anything away from it. It's amazing that humans have developed, and animals show it, and we are still animals. I should still try to get a lot of people to admit that. We are still animals, and we're evolving. And so we see this caring is very interesting. So you have dolphins in the ocean, you have sharks in the ocean, you have algae in the ocean, you have all that going on in the ocean, which is a metaphor for me of the universe. And the dolphins make one thing of the ocean, the algae make another thing of the ocean, the corals do another thing with the ocean. And the outcome of all that is something that we humans consider, very beautiful, awe-inspiring, and also very valuable because, people try to overfish all the time. So, so the universe caring is what we give back to the universe. Caring is one of the more precious things that we have for each other, that we have evolved. And it's evolved out of nature, first and foremost, wanting to take care of its young and have a future. And it has evolved into higher concepts as consciousness has risen. And so caring has become a very high concept now, and a predominant one on planet Earth, by the way, which I'm so glad. It could have turned out some other way. To the universe, if we all wanted to be Nazis and live that way, it's fine. Go ahead. There's no God going to come down and stop you, or if there was a God that could have done that, then no Nazi airplanes would have flew. That kind of thing. So this is something, it's a very beautiful and precious thing that we give back to the universe. When clouds are in the sky and I see a horse in one and you see a bird in the other, and we have triggers some kind of mystical experience, that is beautiful. But someone else standing on another side of the planet looking at the same clouds may have seen nothing or may have seen something quite different. So this this just goes to show you that we add so much back to this universe. We add the meaning. We add the caring back. And we're so programmed from our incarnational patterns, from basically from the beginning, from tribal through empires through the present, of having to get authority and permission from a higher source. I do believe this is why all the earlier channels from Seth and those people on, and back in the 1800s, all used other voices than their own, because they couldn't own the information. I did experiments back in the 80s with channelers, and the experiment was open your eyes and use your regular voice and see what comes through. And I proved in those experiments that the information was just as valuable as some voice from another planet. And it may be the fact that to speak our truth in the past, there's only very few people that could do that. They were the kings, the priests, and all that sort of thing. And and we were always told what to do, when to do it, how far to jump, where to jump, what to eat, what you could eat, what you couldn't eat, even what colors you could use and what colors you couldn't use, what animals you could hunt and not hunt in kingdoms. So we have this pattern that's hard to see through, but I encourage you to try to see through it, and that is that so much of what we give back to the universe is a very natural outcome. Beautiful, precious, we must preserve it. It's incredible stuff, but it doesn't mean it had to come from a deity or it had to come from some higher source. That's just old school stuff, so to speak. We are at the peak of this evolutionary point now. We've carried everything into this moment, and we will now be able to speak with our own voices, and now we'll be able to speak our own truths as never before in history, although it's still a bit risky. Speak your truth sometimes can still get you in trouble. So we have this old tendency to, it must come from some high voice and some voice of authority, and we still have that on the news. We have the news pundits and all these people that are supposed to know more about all this stuff than we did, and historically proven, shamans quite often not known any more than you. Priests have not known any more than you, and generally speaking, there's always been the great ones, but and the futurists and the supercomputer people have been more wrong than ever been right in their projections. So we still have this tendency to not tune into our own truth, tune into our own light, and get answers directly without having to go through authority sources and permissions and voices and all those kind of things that have happened. So it's very important to understand that aspect of it. And when you do, you will become a more powerful person because you can speak the truth. You were designed to speak the truth. It's just that our programming it's been very risky in the past doing these sort of things. And also, most of us in all of our incarnations have not been kings and queens. I know, sad to say, but we have been servants, serfs, and slaves more often than not. And only in this present life, or the life right before this one, literally, did you hear things like, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's a new question in your incarnations. What do you want to be when you grow up? No wonder we get confused. We've never been asked that before. Now you want me to make up my mind what do I want? And same thing with grocery stores. We go in and there's so many choices and abundance that quite often, we just grab something. And I've told the old story about me in video stores, where quite often I'd go into a video store in the day when they still were prominent, and actually not come out with a video and be so spaced out. So there's a lot to deal with, and you can't do it all in one life. But this is the first or second life you've had in this new paradigm so far, and it takes a little getting used to, because the past, so many incarnations in our cellular memories in the past were very limited. Very, very limited what you could think. You were not educated till very recently. A lot of America didn't have electric lights in their home till the 1930s. That sort of thing. So this is all fairly new stuff, and we've accomplished so much so quickly that it's very important for us to cherish this and own it, and not let oligarchies and kings, priests, and thieves, as I talked about, take this away from us, because we've accomplished it. Everything that a king ever had was made by one of us, from his nicely coiffed hair to his silks to his throne were made by us. And it's time we get over that illusion that someone is higher than us, better than us, only because they were born into the right family, kind of thing. This is true freedom of spirit, so to speak. So does the universe care? That's not the universe's job. The universe has got so much else going on, and we care. We add the beauty back, and we learn to love things. This is the stuff that we give. It's our great gift that we give back to the universe and to the cosmic records and to each other. That's why it's so important. Why give all your love and grace to a deity when you're not even giving it to your family or your neighbors? Something's off about that. So just consider that. And so next question here is again kind of tied into this, and this is a question I get repeatedly, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to get people to kind of grok this a little bit. The question was, did the light tell you what the purpose of being human was? No, I asked the light, there is no actual purpose. That would seem like a pre-creation, some kind of intellectual process that went into that. But what's interesting is that this is a natural outcome, and we are blessed to be where we are. So blessed to be where we are. We could have been anything. You could have been a rocky asteroid somewhere. Think about that. You could have been a cloud of gas in the nebula. You could have been particles. But we are this accumulation of particles in all the universe that has come together into this incredible form of a life that we're part of, this Gaia on planet Earth. So the best answer for that is that the beautiful natural outcome of humanity being a part of the system is something that's beyond intelligence, and does have the flavor of intelligence. That's why it tricks some people. It's beyond intelligence, and that is in all the experiments in life forms that Gaia has done on this planet. And I encourage you, if you don't know about it's countless life forms Gaia have experimented in getting to this level. And many of the extinctions and whatever happened long before we were ever evolved. But the natural outcome of this has been something rather interesting. Gaia has been experimenting, and this is not intellectual, this is organic, natural outcomes of life forms. And there were periods on Earth when the life forms were like aliens from outer space. They're some of my most favorite life forms. Go back to those times, and it was all an experiment. Eyes. Where did eyes come from? All this we know now. We've been able to discover how all this came to be. Eyes, ears, sensory systems, psychic abilities, all of that. And as it turns out, humans evolved to where we are now in a very quick period, after all the other experiments in consciousness have been played out here, and is in our cellular memory and in our DNA. That's why none of this had to come from outer space intelligence, is what we're going to do next. It's as organic as it gets, really. And that is that Gaia knows it's alive. Gaia has an awareness that not only includes our kind of consciousness, but much more, includes all the consciousness on planet Earth. And that's why it's wise to tap into the full consciousness of planet Earth, not just what humans are thinking and doing, because we're still the youngest species on planet Earth. But the natural outcome of this is something fascinating, and that is, here's something I have to put a bookmark here and say. There is a natural tendency of the third brain, the upper brain, that you have in your head right now, most of you, I assume, have this third brain up in your head right now. It's the youngest brain. It's the star child brain, I call it, and it's very precocious, and it's very clever. It can mimic psychic ability. It already, in its young state, thinks it created the universe. I mean, how many philosophies say mind or spirit was here first, then the rest of the universe came? What if it was just the opposite? What if the physical universe, in which I was told there's nothing non-physical, it's all infinite levels of subtle and dense energy. What if spirit was a natural outcome of all this? But then, if you go the other way, you've got to believe in some sort of deity thing at some point in the distant past. So the interesting thing is that we have this incredible DNA that no other being on this planet has. We care for more different beings on this planet than any other single species on planet Earth. Have you ever thought about that? Wolves may care about wolves and zebras about zebras, but humans, gosh, we care about everything from lichen to cheetahs. You know, it's amazing the capabilities that we've evolved and the understandings. But what's so cool about being human is that the planet knows it's alive, and it knows that its energy is waning. The Earth in human years is around 80 years old, and she's had lots and lots of babies, lots of experiments in consciousness, all of which have not become extinct, but have become part of the system, part of your consciousness, part of your brain cells, part of your DNA. And could you design a better being if you knew the planet was going to die at some point and you had to get to another planet? Could you design a better being for doing this phase than human beings? It's pretty astounding. With our hands and our ability to build, this has become priority. Once, you know, there was a long time before humans were the dominant species on Earth, if you check evolution. We finally collected enough collective intelligence to really start moving on in societies and systems that we know now. That all happened very rapidly, but it's been a very rapid and very recent episode in human history that humans have become the dominant force on planet Earth. And there's a good reason for that, and that is that we are the star seed. Gaia has created its star seed that will blossom out of the Earth and find its way to other star systems. Really, I mean, unless I see something else, I can't think of a better vehicle, a better creation to build technologies to understand how to find other stars that may have life as we know it. It's just incredible. In all these experiments that Gaia has been going through to get to where we are now, and none of that's been lost. It's all still in us. It's still in the Earth. And we can take all of this knowledge with us wherever we go. And so, is there a purpose? Now there is. You know, but we gave it this purpose. This is our purpose. This is. It wasn't really designed that way because most planetary systems that have life literally live and die. They die. They never get off the planet. So we're one of the rare ones that are capable to leave this star system and move on to other star systems. Absolutely astounding. And so, do our souls have part of the same question is, do our souls have some kind of destiny, something to strive for, a reason for being? Yes, yes, yes. And it becomes more evident every day. The idea is a reason for being. The reason for being is that's what you should give to your life. You should give this meaning to your life. If you don't give it to your life, who will? Who will give you any of this if you don't give it to yourself first and then share it with others and help them see this in themselves? The reason for being is one of those split hair to a million times kind of question, depending on who you are, what religion, what even star system. That's a very philosophical question. I am mostly interested in direct kind of practical things at this point in my evolution, and I see that we have, the outcome has been, I think, very beneficial. We're very lucky to have had this outcome. Luck is some good part of the universe, by the way. And so that we have blossomed on this planet to be the starseed. This is why the planet really loves us, and that's why things are going to change. And this is why we've been given, we humans, we didn't take everything on the planet. We've been given everything on the planet. And 100 years from now, 200 years from now, there will be more forests on the planet than ever before. The waters will be even cleaner. The waters are cleaner now than they were in the 1800s. And things progress quite nicely for planet Earth. And then there does come the point in the future where most humans have migrated to other star systems and are doing quite well. And there's this sort of spiritual connection to your mother planet, and it sort of becomes like a once-in-a-lifetime visit your mother planet. The future of Earth is more like a national park than anyone really living here, and of course we don't need companies and factories and stuff in that future. It's all very much easy to do. You don't need all these clunking machines and everything. So it'll be like going to Mecca once in your life. In the future, going to visit the mother planet. And there will still be people on planet Earth. There'll be people left to be pygmies. There'll be people left to be natural, Native Americans, and people like that. These are the people who are the original stewards of the Earth and will continue to be the stewards of the Earth. As the rest of us, like me, a star child, I want to go off and see other planets. I love this planet. I honor it, but I want to see some other planets. And so, but we still have stewards here. For as long as the planet is habitable. So very interesting to understand how that works. And so let me go on to, I've got a couple more things here. And I may have answered this one already, but it's come up a number of times, and I'd like to just go over it one more time. The deja vu thing. And it says, sometimes we have a feeling that something was meant to be, or events unfold in ways that seem to support that, and that's true. If those feelings are mutual, does indicate that there was an agreement to meet, either before the end of the previous life or between lives. Now, this is the most interesting kind of question to me, because the words that we choose in our modern mind, the word agreement, that's the key word here to understand what is an agreement. For most people on planet Earth, it's not an intellectual process, and it's not. And if it is, it's usually not a very well thought out one. And there's a lot of the agreements that we make, but other agreements that are even more powerful are our emotional bonds, our agreements. Earnest promises we've made people that we intend to keep, or for some reason can't ever keep. Those are agreements, and so these emotional bonds, codependency, money issues, these are all agreements. So some spiritual people I meet have this notion that they can forget everything that's happened on planet Earth. They go to the other side, they stand before a council, they figure out everything that's going to be happening, and then they come back. That's a little too brainy. That's a little too much of a smacks of human brain coming up with that. It doesn't seem to be of Gaia consciousness in its fullness. And so that's, sometimes when people are talking to me, I can tell exactly where that information's coming from, which part of the brain or which part of Gaia it's coming from. So these are the agreements we need to watch out for. I mean, these agreements we make without even thinking. We become emotionally bonded to people. We make promises we may not keep. They're meant to. I mean, how many people have promised to marry each other and forever, better or worse? I mean, those sort of things. And so these are, I'm not saying that you have to keep any of these promises or anything like that. There's no golden rule about that. But we do make a lot of promises we don't keep. And quite often for very good reasons, because we didn't know what we weren't even thinking right when we made the promises in the first place. Things like divorce and things like that on planet Earth from the Gaia perspective has just been fantastic, because it's in this day and age when we're not so bonded on survival anymore. In the old days, a woman needed a man and a man needed to reproduce, and it was all very strong bond. Romantic love, as we know it, has only been a very recent evolution in human history. Check it out. Check out the history of love. And so it's very important to understand that being codependent, making a lot of promises you don't keep, or emotional bonds, which are the deepest kind. These are agreements that can bring you back to people through different incarnations. These are more powerful than just, say, an intellectual thing. I'm with the Council of 77, and here's what we've decided. Well, that in a way says it negates all the natural activity that's happened in all of your incarnational past and in your cellular memory and everything. It's like, okay, good luck there. But for most of us, these are the bonds and agreements we make without even realizing it. And so be careful with your agreements and your bondings, because they will bring you back. And some of these, some very negative relationships are very bonded and will come back many times together because of the bonding on certain issues, be it survival, money, whatever, guilt, all sorts of bonds that happen. So be careful about, quote, your agreements and your promises. Very, very important. Now, there are plenty of people I've talked with over the years and counseled that are part of a more evolved system, so to speak. When they're like I said in the last talk, the future of reincarnation is unfoldment now on this planet, and there are people that have already started this 100 years ago, a lifetime ago, a couple lifetimes ago. They may even project it far back into the past. So at any given point in history, there's always people that are 100 or more years behind us. There are always people 100 or more years ahead of us in their thinking. I don't know if you're like me, but I've always been kind of a visionary about the future. And I remember, and I still have some scrapbooks in the future. We were all going to have flying cars by now. We were all going to have, planes that could fly themselves. Well, we do, but they use them mostly to kill people. But the future didn't actually turn out. I really thought by the year 2000, back in the 50s. I really thought we'd be in a very, very different place in this world. And that's because us visionaries always are way ahead of how the mass population is, which is, by the way, and this is kind of humbling to understand for all of us who think we're smarter than everybody else, is that Gaia is most interested in what the mass population is doing at this time. So we have intellectuals and spiritual people that think they're more evolved than television, more evolved than these other things they're seeing. But there's a reason why, and forgive me for saying this rubs anybody the wrong way, this is a reason why the entire higher conscious movement on planet Earth is a fringe element at this time. Did you hear what I said? It's a fringe element. Just count the numbers. And you look at what the mass population is into. This is where the bulk of Gaia focus is. And I'm someone that thinks we ought to be a lot farther ahead by now, but I now understand. The light has humbled me with this understanding of how this Gaia system works. And there's always going to be people behind us, and always going to be people ahead of us pulling us, and people behind us pulling us backwards, people ahead of us pulling us forward. And so the dance of life is quite seriously 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And I've done this dance with seminar groups live, and we'll do it around the room. And you think that's odd, but 2 steps forward, 1 step back, you'd be surprised how fast you get around the room. It's interesting, isn't it? And so this is the dance of life, and some of you are way ahead of where we're really at, and some people are behind. Certain institutional systems are way behind where we're really at this point, and they will adjust. So when you think that spirituality is everything, well, you aren't seeing the whole planet the way it really is. Spirituality is one band of a rainbow, and this is a rainbow planet. And so people tend to think, intellectuals are smarter, know more, or spiritual people are better people and know more than we on this and that and the other. But it's the average folks. They're the ones that have built all the devices that we benefit from, solved all the problems. Most of the problems on Earth have not been solved by geniuses. They've been solved by regular people. Some of the most important problems on Earth. And so I think the average common man really doesn't get his due when we kind of think of consciousness on the planet and evolution on the planet. You might be surprised at what's going on in the ghettos and things like that. And I think a lot of spiritual people forget. Why don't you take your stuff to the ghettos and preach it and see what happens? You see what I mean? It's so how is the whole of the planet going to ascend at the same time when you're not even considering what's going on in homeless shelters or ghettos? What happens to all those people? It's the rapture again. Only the good get enlightened. So these are normal ways the Gaia and the light has taught me to start thinking about things. Many of it shocking to me. But again, as I start to wrap this up, I'm looking forward to doing more of this, and I would still look forward to more of your questions coming in. I'm from the looks of it, I'm going to have to put an advanced course together here too, because quite a number of you are pretty advanced, if you ask me. So we can delve into that stuff together. I do really appreciate everybody working with me on this first series. It's just the beginning of what I'm going to be doing the rest of my life, and I consider all of you that have been part of this first series to be very special. And I thank you for tolerating me, listening to me, and sending your great questions, because it is a stretch. And the thing about predicting the future and about where we're going is that if you could actually predict it, it would only be the same, because up until now, predicting the future has just been predicting the past. It's patterns. Just patterns. If this happened, the Mayans were this way, the Egyptians were this way, psychics are this way. They're kind of predicting the past. A true future is something that you can't quite predict, but we're getting an inkling of now, and we have to kind of let go of all this this old world kind of mentality and a way of predicting the future. And I'll put it this way: the light has really made this clear to me, and that is that up until now, almost everything you know, almost everything all humans have ever known is past tense. In reality, at the speed of light, you're not even seeing the real me when you look at me. At the speed of sound, I've already thought of other thoughts before that sound gets to your ears. So we're always seeing and hearing things in the past tense. We're not in real time yet. We have not evolved to being in real time. It is happening very rapidly now. We're coming into real time thanks to technologies, the internet, end of taboos, travel. The future is not, and that's all hindsight. Hindsight has been the wisdom of humanity up till now. Hindsight. And the future is foresight. Think about this. The future is foresight. You're going to see it coming now. You're not going to talk about it after it happens. And so much of the prophecies and things up to this point are just repeats of old prophecies that have already come true and gone, and or just shades thereafter, or cut and paste models thereafter to sell you books or stairways to heaven and all that sort of thing. But start practicing foresight now. We're all good at hindsight. You know, once it's happened, we learn our lessons and we tend to forget them again. But hindsight is the wisdom of humanity up to this point. Seeing things coming, learning our lessons learned are where the future is at. And once you can see things coming, you are now going to be living in real time. We're not there yet, but we're very close to being in real time with each other and with the universe. And so, with that, I'd like to make a couple of announcements. I really, like I said, I'd really like to thank all of you for signing on to this webinar sessions, and I'm definitely planning on doing a little bit of editing, getting all this in an MP3 format for you, and because this is a new phase in my life, I'm really having fun with it, and hope to get better at it. I've decided to have 2 more seminars starting later this month. I'll let you know about it in my newsletter that's coming out in a couple of days. I'm going to start off. I'm going to have more of these. They won't be 2 a week, 1 every other week, or something like that. But the first one will be new insights from the other side. This is probably the biggest category of questions that I get, and there's so much more we can discuss beyond reincarnation. So the first one, and these are going to be a series of 3. And we'll get you the information on that. So the first one is going to be new insights from the other side, and I appreciate your questions on that too, because like I said, I'm not interested or can think of everything. It takes all of us to do that. I can only do my part. Then the second one is these are 2 I've never done before, really, and the second one is one I've never done before. It's been so personal to me, but it's time. I'm told it's time to get it out, and that is my connection to White Buffalo and the White Buffalo wisdom since 1994. It's a great story and a lot of great adventures. It'll be a 3-part series, and it's White Buffalo wisdom. and it may surprise you the effect that white buffaloes had on me and my career, and even in business. It's fascinating what I've learned. So stay tuned. The next newsletter will give you all the details for that. And I also ask you, please have your friends sign up on my newsletters if they're not already getting it. And I'm still want to get the DVD Gaia, Spirit of Gaia, out to everybody I can. And so keep spreading the word about that if you would. I thank everybody that's done that. But I get so many comments on that piece of work from people that have watched it more than once. And I know it's having a good effect out there, which was my intended purpose. So with that, I really appreciate everybody letting me learn with you, and sometimes you learn by teaching. I think that's probably the case, and I look forward to more of these adventures in consciousness, as Seth would say, with you in the future. So God bless, and may the light of life always bless you, and bless you in all ways. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.